Shall I stand up?
Yeah.
Order. Jim Shannon to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This House has considered the persecution of Buddhists in Tibet. First of all, can I thank right honourable members for being here. I also want to put on record my thanks to the Backbench committee, in particular for agreeing to this. And we have some people in the gallery today in the audience who have a particular interest in the persecution issues, in particular for the Buddhists in Tibet. The Honourable Lady for Congleton's here. I know that all my time that I've known her, which is my time in this House, is the same as hers. She's had a particular interest in Nepal, always has, and I'm very, very pleased to see the Honourable Lady here to participate and add her vast knowledge of the subject to this debate. We're not just quite sure yet, Madam Chair, who the Minister is. I'm sure he's on his way, and there may be some, maybe there's other things happening. Maybe there's a change of ministerialships as we sit here. Who knows? Who knows? But anyway, whoever the Minister is will no doubt make a contribution shortly.
Is not in his or her place, as this is the first time this has ever happened in this House since I've been a member since 2015. Others may have experienced this dereliction of duty, but I've never experienced it, and on such an important subject.
Thank you. So if another Minister or Whip can't be found in time, PPS should be advised to take notes and rise at the end to make apologies on behalf of the Minister and inform members that the Minister will respond to the points made. PPSs can't make specific speeches on behalf of the government, but I'm sure the honourable member, who I know is very assiduous, will make an assiduous note. Thank you. Jim Shannon.
I thank the Shadow Minister for that clarity. I think it's important we have the clarity. Honourable Lady is absolutely right. We do need the reason we have these debates, we don't fill in a Thursday afternoon, Madam Chair, just because we've got a bit of time. We fill it in because we've got a subject matter that's important, and that's why we're all here to make that. So we do hope that the PPS can take all the copious notes that are important, and the Minister, when he or she arrives, will make sure that the responses that we seek are the ones that we want to have on record. I'm also very grateful that we're having this important debate on the persecution of Buddhists in Tibet. The people of Tibet are dear to me, so I find the topic to be of special importance. I'm chair of the APPG and freedom of religious belief. We speak up for those of Christian faith, those with other faiths, and those with no faith. Today we're speaking with those for other faiths. We're speaking for those who have the Buddhist faith. They're one of our stakeholders in the APPG, and we're very, very important to us. A delegation to Nepal. Yeah.
Mentioning that, I would just like to pay tribute to him for the work that he has done for so many faiths.
Yes.
That for the Christian faith particularly and regularly, but also remembering in China that it is Buddhists and Muslims who are also persecuted by a vicious regime. And the honourable gentleman, I think, is more assiduous than any other member in the House, with the possible exception of my honourable friend, the member for Congleton.
My honourable friend for that intervention. He and I share a similar faith, and we both realise in this House, Madam Chair, that we serve a greater person, a greater God, and our job in this place is to do that, and we do that faithfully for all religious views as well. The delegation organised by the APPG for freedom of religious belief, which I understand that the Honourable Lady for Congleton has been in Nepal maybe on 2 occasions perhaps, and I'm quite sure that from them delegations we have learned much from the delegations about the situation of Tibetan refugees in Nepal, many of whom are unable to obtain official documentation. I mean, the significance of what happens in Nepal towards Buddhists and those of other religious minorities is something that is particularly worrying. The situation is ongoing, which troubles me. It's clear that there must be done to ensure that all Tibetan refugees in Nepal and indeed in Tibet find access to government services and assistance, which necessitates documentation. In Tibet itself, persecution of Buddhists have been going on for some time. The persecution includes general cultural and linguistic oppression, as well as forced imprisonment and other grave human rights violations. And according to the US State Department 2021 report on international religious freedom, in China, Buddhist monks and nuns in Tibet receive forced political education and face almost total regulation of their religious activities. In essence, the Chinese Communist Party, as the Honourable Gentleman in his intervention reminded us, actively seeks to control the religious affairs of Tibetan Buddhists and those of other Muslim faith across China. And what's happened to the Uyghur Muslims is nothing, in my opinion, short of genocide. In essence, the Chinese Communist Party tries to take control of all religious affairs of Tibetan Buddhists. Has been shown to do to other religious groups something similar. And there are direct violations of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we commemorated just last week, because it's important that we put down on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as we did at many events. China and the Chinese Communist Party holds thousands of prisoners, political and otherwise, in Tibet, many of whom are religious figures. Whilst there are not many details, Madam Chair, about prisons, it is known that many political prisoners are held in Tibet. The report estimates suggest that some over 1,800 were held in 2021, but it is estimated that it may even be a greater number, and we suspect that it is. Free Tibet reports human rights violations in these prisons, including torture, the denial of medical treatment, and the denial of legal assistance. Unfortunately, this follows a predictable pattern of and in China, as can be seen in Xinjiang province, where the Uyghur Muslims are detained in nothing short of detention camps, and to the fact that some millions may very well be the numbers that are detained. In addition to its legal requirements under international law commitments, the UK has, I believe, a moral obligation, which is why we were seeking to have some idea from the Minister in his department to call out these abuses and to work for change. We must do, I believe, more to promote human rights and to relieve suffering of minority religious and ethnic communities throughout China. Whether you be a Baha'i, whether you be a Christian, whether you be a Muslim, whether you be a Hindu, indeed, whether you be any religious and ethnic group in China, China will try to deny your right to worship your God as you so wish. Monitoring of the situation is difficult because of China's strict hold on communication flow in the region. Little to no foreign presence is allowed in Tibet, whilst when it's allowed, tours are highly choreographed and limited to specific areas. So there's a very, very tight control of what takes place, and the opportunity to have an independent and free religious view is restricted. Cultural repression goes hand in hand with the US State Department describes as and I quote, the sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism. These efforts are outlined in Chinese policy, which has been implemented in other areas. Efforts include forcing Mandarin instruction, restricting religious celebrations and pilgrimages, and the close monitoring of monasteries and other religious sites. The Dalai Lama, the traditional religious leader of one of the major Buddhist schools in the region, lives in exile in India, while China has attempted to take control of the religious and political position, including through the kidnapping of a chosen religious leader. The Panchen Lama, essentially the Chinese Communist Party, seeks to control the religious operations of Tibet Buddhism through close supervision and control of leadership. It's very clear, Madam Chair, that what happens to those of a different religious minority and faith in Tibet and indeed across China as well is something that, for instance, this Sunday, everyone in this chamber here will go to the church which they wish to worship the God they wish to do. And you'll have that freedom, because that's what we do in this country. That freedom is not there in Tibet, and that's the concerns that we have. Such cultural oppression is immeasurably damaging to affected communities. With the loss of language and religious heritage comes the loss of local identity as well. The very culture, your traditions, your history, the importance of what you do. And we must do all we can to prevent that happening. It's good to see the Minister in her place, and Minister, we do look for a positive response in relation to this. It's a really big subject. We've been asked for this for some time, and we recognise the need to debate it in this House and then make recommendations from this House that can help those of a Buddhist faith in Tibet and those across the whole of China as well. During the recent UN Forum on Minority Issues, the nation of Tibet was raised, and the contribution from the International Campaign for Tibet was incredibly telling. And I quote, "Today Tibetans," this is just an example, "Tibetans face discrimination in all aspects of their lives, including employment, housing, travel. Unlike their Han Chinese counterparts, they often experience obstacles in obtaining passports, and their freedom of movement is severely impeded. Employment opportunities for Tibetans are often below substandard salaries as well." So truly, to be a Buddhist in Tibet, indeed to be a Tibetan in Tibet, you're a second-class citizen in your own country. In recent years, the Tibetan language has also been significantly marginalised, including via a vast boarding school system that separates Tibetan children from their families and enforces Chinese language curriculum. Again, we speak the language of our country here. If you were Tibetan in Tibet, you couldn't speak your own language. You could only speak Chinese. And again, it does underline the importance of the issue. Tibetans are increasingly unable to study in their mother tongue, which places them at an educational and economic disadvantage when competing with Han Chinese for career opportunities. You haven't the same opportunities when it comes to jobs. You haven't the same opportunities when it comes to health. You haven't the same opportunities when it comes to education. The marginalisation of Tibetans in the labour market is further compounded by a Han-centric development model that exploits Tibet's natural resources but excludes local Tibetans from input and benefits. The Chinese come in, they take total control, and then they bleed Tibet of their resources. In particular, we're concerned by the forced resettlement of up to 2 million Tibetan nomads, farmers and rural residents. Again, the significance of the mass number, Madam Chair, of 2 million Tibetans who have been resettled tells us again what's been happening in Tibet for some time. Tibetans are also vastly underrepresented in leadership positions in party, in government, in the military, on both provincial and local levels. And it should be noted that the absence of an independent judicial system and lack of access to justice for Tibetans, and overall the implementation of elements of the totalitarian rule by the Chinese authorities, have led to a pervasive climate of fear that precludes the assumption of free, prior and informed consent given by those affected by state measures. That gives you an idea of the control, Madam Chair. It gives you an idea of the suppression of individual liberty, freedom and rights. It tells us what happens to their human rights. It tells us what happens to them when it comes to worshipping and the way that they wish to do. This is only the last. This part of the speech that I've made outlines the case very clearly for what happens. But to go further into this, the gravity of the situation is again very clear. I had a look at a poster, Madam Chair, entitled Tibet in 2023. It went month by month with the difficulties outlined every month, and unfortunately the months didn't get better. In January, it illustrated the arrest of Tibetans Tatsi and Donko. I hope my pronunciation is correct, or even partially correct. In February, they had new cybersecurity laws in place for surveillance and censorship. They had increased restrictions, and then they had phone inspections during the Tibet Dasar celebration. In other words, everything that happens in Tibet is monitored. Everything that Tibetans and Buddhists want to do is restricted. And you can't even have a cup of tea. You couldn't breathe your last breath because it all would be monitored. Month by month, beatings take place. Rights eradicated from censorship to ensuring that university entrance exams can be carried out in Chinese only. It continues on and on and on. And that poster is simply the tip of the iceberg. It just explains 12 different months where things are happening. Indeed, the latest up-to-date news came out yesterday when this speech was just been written, and it reinforced about the arrest of 4 Tibetans who were involved in stone carving Buddhist mantras. I mean, Madam Chair, really? It's a stone carving for their Buddhist mantras, for their faith? I mean, where is the threat in that? And does anybody honestly believe that that's right? No, it's not. And obviously this debate would illustrate that. I've been so clear on the need for this House to take greater steps to defend religious freedom and to engage with the Chinese, and sometimes that's frustrating in itself because they don't seem to want to engage. The Chinese are indeed the masters of propaganda and censorship. This House will not be silenced. The debate today is to give us all that opportunity to express that. And I'm calling on the Minister very much, and our government, and for the future to be the strong voice that we are calling for today through this debate. There are a number of asks that have been forwarded to me. I've given them to the PPS beforehand, and I would ask the Minister how we can help to do the following. First one is protect the rights of the Tibetan people and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama to follow their own religious tradition in the selection procedure of the 15th Dalai Lama. It's really not too much to ask, but it's one of the very basic rights that the Buddhists are seeking. Secondly, to free the Panchen Lama, who's been in detention for some time. Thirdly, to release all Tibetan prisoners of conscience, the majority of whom are from the monastic communities, again illustrating exactly why it's important. Fourthly, freedom to practice religious traditions without fear of state persecution. That state that tries to control the very life that you lead, that has to be changed. And fifthly, freedom to learn the Tibetan language, your language, the language that they love, the language they want to use to express themselves, which holds the very key to assessing the complete Buddhist canons of Kagyu and Tengyur. In summary, Madam Chair, the situation of FoRB, of freedom of religious belief in Tibet, is grave, with nigh on total governmental control over religious institutions and attempts at suppression of language and material culture, leading to very clear violations of human rights. And I say it often when I have these debates, but it's the truth, Madam Chair, and you know it. And it's simply this: human rights and religious persecution are like that. They're not separate, they're the same. If you deny somebody their right to worship their God in the way they wish, you take that away from it. And yet, if you deny their human rights, then one follows after the other, and you can't deny that they're the same. I look forward to hearing very much those right honourable and honourable members who have come to make a contribution today. I look very much forward to the Shadow Minister's contribution and to the Minister as well. And today we have this debate as we seek to address these violations from our positions within Westminster Hall in the House of Commons today. Let us today, Madam Chair, be the voice for the voiceless in Tibet, and let that voice from us, elected representatives, today be found loud and clear, that Tibetans and Buddhists must have the right to worship as they wish to do, to have the freedom, to have the liberty, to have the right to worship their God as they so wish. Thank you very much.
Bob, so I'll put the question. The question is that this House has considered the matter of the persecution of Buddhists in Tibet. Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to see you in the chair as always. I want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate and the Honourable Member for Strangford. He's always in this place anyway. It's good to see him actually leading rather than being one of the last people talking absolute breakneck speed because he's only got 3 minutes to get his words in. He talked about his membership of the all-party group on freedom of religion or belief, which also a member of, and it does excellent work. I'm also an officer of the All-Party Group for Tibet, which is what brings me here today, and it is a very active group. The officers speak quite frequently in the chamber and ask questions of the government. And just in the last year, we welcomed the Sikyong, the political leader, Penpa Tsering, and again, as the honourable member did, I apologise for my pronunciation of these things. I trust that Hansard will have my notes and we'll get it right on paper, even if what I'm saying bears very little relation to how it's actually pronounced. We welcomed him to Parliament. We knew his predecessor very well. And we also met with Tibetan activist Dr. Gayal Lo about Tibetan children being placed in Chinese-style colonial boarding schools, which the honourable member referred to. Several years ago, we made a trip to the Tibetan Parliament in exile in Dharamsala, which was very eye-opening and gave us a chance to just sort of speak to so many people that had been displaced from Tibet. We're not allowed to visit Tibet, as was said, although we've been trying for a number of times. I've also been fortunate enough to go to Nepal a couple of times and to meet Tibetan people in exile there. I would have hoped, since my last speech on Tibet, which was in 2020, that there would have at least been some humanitarian improvements in the region, but sadly not. Instead, China has continued to act with impunity, denying the most fundamental human rights to people in Tibet, and has not ceased its vigorous extermination of the Tibetan identity. As part of my contribution today, I would like to echo the recent statement made by the Sikyong in Dharamsala, which, as I said, was is the headquarters of the Tibetan government in exile. His speech was given to a group of Tibetans at the, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, the temple there, to mark Human Rights Day and the anniversary of the Dalai Lama being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said that the Chinese Communist Party was, and I quote, forging a strong sense of the Chinese nation as one single community, promoting the Chinese language, the Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism, and that such infliction of suffering and oppression of the Tibetan people by the Chinese Communist Party is unparalleled and unprecedented. And it is true, Chinese control in Tibet reaches far beyond what most would even expect. In August this year, a yogurt festival was met with a police crackdown. Shoton is the Tibetan yogurt festival, so it's not just a one-off, it is a very important cultural event, but entirely harmless. It typically includes traditional performances, a feast involving yogurt, of course, and the unveiling of a large portrait of the Buddha. This year, there was a decidedly different atmosphere with a heavy Chinese police presence, prohibitions on engagement in religious and public gatherings, and inspection booths to confirm the identities of participants and devotees. And that is just one example of the sort of pernicious oppression of the Tibetan people. They can't even carry out expressions of their cultural identity without the Chinese seeking to stop them. As I said, over the last decade, Tibetan Buddhism has been seen as a threat to the occupying Chinese state and has been tightly regulated, with Chinese officials closely monitoring and controlling religious activity at monasteries and nunneries. Religious festivals have been banned more frequently, and government employees, teachers and students have been barred from participating in religious activities. Aside from religion, Chinese control of education and the workforce has been extensive and overreaching. Tibetan schools have been closed, and the Chinese government has been accused of trying to forcibly assimilate more than 1 million Tibetan children through state-run boarding schools in an attempt to eliminate Tibet's distinctive linguistic, cultural and religious traditions. And as I said, all those things it's not just about the suppression of religious views, it is part and parcel of their whole cultural identity too. In April, a group of independent experts within the United Nations human rights system expressed concern over China's alleged practice of having Tibetans transferred from their traditional rural lives to low-skilled and low-paid employment since 2025 through a programme that's described as voluntary, but experts have said that in practice this participation has been coerced. I'd also like to briefly, as I always do when I speak about Tibet, raise the environmental significance of instability in this region. The Tibetan Plateau in the Himalayas is known as the Third Pole. It's home to the largest ice storage outside of the North and South Poles. As a direct result of global warming, permafrost, the permanently frozen layer on or under the Earth's surface is thawing, with potentially devastating consequences to the invaluable water supply that flows into neighbouring superpowers China and India. The Mekong, Yangtze, Ganges and Indus rivers all have their source in Tibet, with 1.6 billion people supported by the rivers. If the third pole continues melting at the rate it is, the effects will be felt around the world. Whole communities destroyed, an unprecedented refugee crisis, and the potential for Indo-Chinese relations to turn increasingly sour with an arms race for resources. Events at COP28 this week, and I got back from there on Monday, have underlined just how difficult it is to facilitate global action on climate change, with the 1.5 degrees target increasingly in doubt. But when we have a situation where the Tibetan people can't even defend their own environment, can't speak up for themselves, and are having to rely on a hostile force, the Chinese government, to speak for them, the possibility of their concerns being recognised is even less than it would be for many climate vulnerable places trying to speak up. So we do have to consider not just the terrible human rights record of the CCP in Tibet, but also the environmental impact of what it's doing. I do remember challenging the government of the current Foreign Secretary, so when he was Prime Minister, back in 2013 about the UK's relationship with China. And there was quite a bit of fanfare at the time because the then business secretary, during the years of the coalition, then Business Secretary Vince Gable and the then Foreign Secretary William Hague launched a business and human rights action plan, which was meant to mean that the two things weren't separate, and when we were doing business with countries like China, human rights always had to be on the agenda. So in theory, it was a really good move, although round about that time I met with the then a trade minister, I think it was, who was in the other place, but he was coming to the APPG for China, and I asked him about human rights, and he said, that's nothing to do with me, that's Foreign Office, I'm just there to do business deals with China. So it wasn't working as well in practice as it could have done. And I just think it is so important when we do business. Of course we want to trade with China, they're incredibly important, but we have to use that trading relationship to exert leverage, because that's the only way in which we can do. So I will finish by asking the Minister, is that happening? What representations we're making to China, not just about Tibet and the plight of the Buddhists there, but also about the Uyghur Muslims, the Falun Gong, and the people of Hong Kong too? And is that something that is happening across government, not just by the Foreign Office? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to follow the member from Bristol East and also, of course, my colleague and friend, the Honourable Member for Strangford. I thank him for calling this debate and for his dedication to speaking out for those who have no voice and are oppressed, in particular with regard to their religion or belief. I have the privilege of being the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. But for the record, Madam Chair, can I say that I am speaking today in my role as a parliamentarian? Can I also thank the Duty Minister for coming to the debate and welcome her to it, and I look forward to her remarks. I'm going to, and it's a privilege on occasion to have a little more time than perhaps one normally has to speak about an issue. So I'm going, if I may, to first of all go back to a report that was produced by the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission when I was the chair in 2016, and it was titled The Darkest Hour, and it was about the crackdown on human rights in China from 2013 to 16. And there is a chapter on Tibet, which quotes from submissions to us that since the Chinese invasion in 1949, an estimated 1.2 million Tibetans have been raped, tortured and murdered, thousands imprisoned, and over 6,000 Tibetan Buddhist monasteries destroyed. This was according to the submission from Tibet Post International, who said, every aspect of Tibetan life is under siege, and Tibetans have even fewer civil and political rights than Chinese people, also ruled by the Communist Party. The regime enforces its control over every aspect of life through the threat and use of arbitrary punishments, at times including severe violence. And the Tibet Society submitted to us, Tibetans charged with political crimes are often tried in secret, not allowed independent legal representation, and evidence against them is extracted by torture. And to then, Free Tibet submitted, a number of political prisoners escaped from Tibet between 2013 and 2016 and provided testimonies about their treatment, including beatings by police and other security services during interrogation sessions, mock executions, receiving electric shocks during interrogations, and being locked in cells that were pitch black or so small they could not move. Several reported being shackled to a device known as an iron chair, which forces the detainee to bear their entire weight on their wrists and legs. They will be hung from this chair for periods of up to 4 or 5 hours at a time, sometimes accompanied by electric shocks, and intervals when they were removed from the chair to be beaten. So that was in 2016. And then in 2020, the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission produced a further report. It was actually quite difficult to find a title for this report because we'd also already called the last one The Darkest Hour. We had to call this one then The Darkness Deepens, the crackdown on human rights in China from 2016 to 2020. And in summary regarding Tibet, we noted repression in Tibet has intensified, torture and ill-treatment are widespread and continue with impunity, images of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan flag are banned, there are more foreign journalists in North Korea than in Tibet, according to Tibet Post International. Reporters Without Borders listed Tibet as the 176th worst out of 180 in its Press Freedom Index. Freedom House lists Tibet as amongst the worst in the world, with the lowest score for civil and political rights. Restrictions on the use of the Tibetan language had created discrimination, and thousands of homes destroyed in the Buddhist communities of Larangar and Yarghar. And just to give a bit more detail about those, there was the mass-scale destruction of homes and forced removal of people from several areas. The two that I've just quoted, for example, Free Tibet and Tibet Watch indicated that communities of Larangar and Yarghar had been drastically escalated in terms of the removal in the past 4 years, that's up to 2020. 4,828 residents removed from Larangar, 4,725 buildings demolished, and those who were removed were required to sign documents that they would not return. Some were driven many miles away, some even 1,700 kilometres away. And in this report, the Conservative Human Rights Commission concluded with a warning. As international attention increasingly focuses on the atrocity crimes against the Uyghurs and the destruction of freedoms and autonomy in Hong Kong, there is a danger that Tibet could get forgotten. It is vital that this does not happen and that the egregious human rights violations in Tibet receive the attention they deserve. Well, that warning was in 2020, and sadly, those words were all too prescient because the atrocities which have been meted out in Tibet haven't received the attention that they deserve. Sadly, whilst an increasingly and rightly intense international spotlight, including here from the UK, has been focused on the plight of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, it has not been focused on Tibet with the intensity that it should be, and that includes by ourselves here in the UK. Now, I know that the Duty Minister will respond in a number of ways and will read out that we are concerned about human rights violations in Tibet, including restrictions on freedom of religion or belief, and on freedom of assembly or association, and on reports of forced labour. But speaking, as I say, as a parliamentarian, can I say that the words we are using are simply not concerning enough? Now, the Minister will no doubt comment that in June 2022, the UK and 47 other countries joined a statement at the UN Human Rights Council about the human rights situation in Tibet and calling on the Chinese authorities to abide by the human rights obligations. Now, I have that statement in front of me. Just one line refers to Tibet, and even that not exclusively. The exact words are, "We also continue to be gravely concerned about the deterioration of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong and the human rights situation in Tibet." The Minister may also refer to the fact that in September 2023, the UK raised the specific issue of the boarding schools, which has been referred to by colleagues, in a national statement at the UN's 54th Human Rights Council. Again, I have that statement here. And again, just one line in a much longer statement referring to a number of other countries. And once again, even in that line, Tibet is not referred to exclusively. We read, "Systematic violations persist in Xinjiang and Tibet, where the UN reports 1 million Tibetan children have been separated from their families to assimilate them into Han culture." In fact, there are hardly words to describe this. The fact that, as reported by the UN, so when we're talking about an authoritative source with experts who've looked into this, that around 1 million Tibetan children are being removed from their families to be compulsorily re-educated. And I've heard that this involves children as young as 2 years old. We're speaking of very young children here in many cases. The UN experts indicated that this points to the vast majority of Tibetan children, so we're talking about a generation, losing their facility with their native language and the ability to communicate easily with their parents. I've heard of how they might be allowed back home for a short time after, say, 3 months, and they find then that they can't understand what their parents are saying. They've lost the ability to communicate, contributing to the erosion of their identity and contrary to the prohibition of discrimination and the rights to education, linguistic and cultural rights, freedom of religion or belief, and other minority rights of these children of the Tibetan people. In fact, the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and there is no stronger crime, states, forcibly transferring children of a group to another group is genocide, when with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. We need to use much stronger words when we are speaking about such issues. I know that might not always be possible in formal UN statements, but there is nothing to stop us outside that environment speaking about this in a way that really reflects the absolute misery that these children must be suffering. Then the Minister may also refer to the UK coordinating with partners to draw international attention to the human rights situation in Tibet, most recently in the November 2023 G7 statement. I also have that statement in front of me. My staff have done a word search. It is several pages long, ranging across the world, with whole paragraphs covering concerns relating to individual countries. There is half a line on Tibet. Again, not exclusively. It reads, "We also remain concerned about the human rights situation in Xinjiang and Tibet. Meanwhile, over the years, the abuse in Tibet continues. The language which is being used to condemn this is wholly inadequate. Will the Minister please review how we refer to what is happening in Tibet?" We need to speak out more strongly because words do matter. Only yesterday, Ben Rogers, long-time authority on this region, and indeed the Vice Chair of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission, when I was Chair, who was largely responsible for the research and drafting and production of the reports I've referred to, he said, China shows consistently that it does take note of international criticism and that pressure, public statements and, where necessary, sanctions are important. What more will our government do to call out these concerns? We've just commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Genocide Convention, sagely saying, never again. But it is happening again for the Tibetans. Their centuries-old ethno-national identity, religion and cultural heritage is seen by the Chinese Communist Party as disloyalty and a threat to the state, and is being systematically and comprehensively erased. Why and how? Because the decades-long occupation of Tibet has happened with inadequate protest from the world. And whilst the Chinese have refined their tactics for suppressing an entire people. As Nuri Tukel, Commissioner for the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, says chillingly, it became efficient at eradicating culture and independence while evoking very little protest from the world. I recommend his excellent and well-informed book, No Escape. The oppressive techniques now used by Chen Guangguo in Xinjiang, he honed in Tibet with far too little outcry from the world. Hitler said, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Because the world looked away. He then invaded Poland and began his genocide of the Jewish people, allowing authoritarians to keep persecuting, and the world looked away, as it is too often now doing for Tibet, as China brushes aside and away the heritage, culture and identity of Tibetans, now using facilities which were unheard of only a generation ago. Digital dictatorship, technology for mass surveillance, AI and spying using electronic devices, even on children. Now, I would like to make reference now to the work of the Religious and Cultural Heritage Working Group of the International Religious Freedom of Belief Alliance, which I've had the privilege to chair until I handed the baton over just yesterday to the ambassador from the Czech Republic, Robert Rehak, who will take over as chair for 2024. But that working group on religious and cultural heritage has been co-led by my Deputy Special Envoy, David Burrows, and he took the opportunity at the recent Ministerial on Freedom of Religion or Belief in Prague just 2 weeks ago to speak of his concerns of the weaponization by the Chinese of Tibetans' cultural heritage. He explained that not only are the Chinese authorities seeking to extinguish the Tibetans' own cultural traditions, but by using, cynically, an international systems to register themselves as a custodian of Tibetan culture, they are, if you like, asserting their ownership of it, and through this making the process more aligned to Chinese Han culture. And this is done through policies such as conservation, registrations and techniques, through, for example, the UNESCO system facilitating registration of cultural and religious assets, and the registration of cultural expressions under the World Intellectual Property Organization. Now, this is something that we should be alert and aware of. Tibetan religious cultural heritage is being weaponized by the Chinese authorities to reimagine and redefine Tibet's status as a culture, at the very time as China challenges Tibet's very right to independence. In the case of Tibet, there is a pressing urgency to recognise that it will be increasingly hard to defend the freedom of religion or belief for these people who are threatened by cultural genocide, and in the case of the children I've referred to, by actual genocide. Compelling words, more action is needed to address this. I want, if I may, to close by referring to a statement which my successor, Ambassador Robert Rehak, Chair of the International Alliance, will shortly be producing. It was discussed yesterday at our plenary. We have a monthly plenary. There are 42 countries in our alliance now, and each month we select an individual prisoner of conscience, a religious prisoner of conscience, to champion. And our December prisoner of conscience is the 11th Panchen Lama. So I'm going to just close by reading the statement, which will shortly be published as chair of our alliance by the Ambassador Robert Rehak from the Czech Republic, my successor. And can I say I cannot think of a more worthy and capable and committed successor than Ambassador Rehak to take over this role. He will say, as the chair of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, I express my grave concern for the ongoing enforced disappearance of Gedun Choeki Nyima, the 11th Panchen Lama, whose whereabouts and well-being in the People's Republic of China have been unknown for nearly 30 years. PRC authorities abducted Gedun Choeki Nyima in 1995 when he was 6 years old, and just days after His Holiness the Dalai Lama recognised him as the 11th Panchen Lama. In response, the PRC installed its own Panchen Lama and continues attempts to compel Tibetan Buddhists to pledge allegiance to the government-selected individual. I am concerned that PRC authorities have denied Gedun Choeki Nyima a lifetime of being able to freely practice his faith in a manner of his choosing. Further, I find the lack of independent access to his whereabouts, the seeming restrictions on his freedom of movement, and the limited information about him spanning nearly 3 decades highly troubling. Gedun Choeki Nyima is one among many Tibetans whom PRC authorities have silenced or oppressed for expressions of their beliefs, culture, language and traditions. This includes detaining Tibetans for possessing images of the Dalai Lama, such as Go Sherab Gyatso, a Tibetan Buddhist monk currently sentenced to 10 years in prison for his peaceful advocacy, and whom authorities previously detained for reportedly possessing and displaying a portrait of the Dalai Lama. The PRC's cultural erasure throughout Tibet, including efforts to sinicize Tibetan Buddhism and interfere in the selection process of Tibetan Buddhist lamas, including the Dalai Lama, are alarmingly widespread. Earlier this year, several UN experts expressed concern about credible reports that PRC authorities have coerced approximately 1 million Tibetan children in what they characterized as, quote, a mandatory large-scale program intended to assimilate Tibetans into majority Han culture, contrary to the international human rights standards. Separating a generation of Tibetan youth from their heritage will do untold damage to their ability to shape and preserve their identity. I urge the PRC to cease all human rights abuses against Tibetans, including by accounting for the whereabouts and well-being of Gedun Choeki Nyima, ending the coercion of Tibetan children into government-run boarding schools, upholding freedom of religion or belief for all, and abandoning policies and practices aimed at erasing Tibet's rich cultural, religious and linguistic identity.
Thank you very much, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to contribute to this debate under your chairmanship. Before beginning the debate, Ms Vaz, I wanted just to briefly put on record my concern about the discourtesy of the government not turning up until late to today's debate on such an important subject, and also the fact that there are people in the gallery today who wanted to hear and wanted the Minister to hear about every single word of this important debate. And I couldn't help but notice that there's not a Scottish National Party spokesperson either. And I do feel that there is a bit of a sense of disarray today, Ms Vaz. I'm not sure that the Chair has anything to be able to do about that, but I hope that that more can be done to improve for next time, perhaps. Ms Vaz, the All-Party Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief is one of the most active all-party groups in Parliament, and the two most active members of it are here today. I would like to congratulate the member for Strangford for securing the debate and for laying out in such clear terms his concerns. On a number of occasions, of course, he has mentioned other issues around freedom of religion or belief which concern him, including the impact of blasphemy laws in Pakistan, the treatment of Muslim minorities in the Xinjiang region of the People's Republic of China. And indeed, this particular concern was recently highlighted in the Financial Times in an excellent piece which they had, outlining new satellite evidence of the destruction of mosques in the Xinjiang region. But it was also the member for Congleton who laid out the mass displacement of people in the Tibetan region, which is really worrying. Over 1 million children, she recorded in her speech, where clearly there is a program of sinicization going on, where individuals are not permitted to speak their own native tongue, and where this will cause, of course, a great barrier between children and their parents. It's very worrying that 1 million children could be moved into dormitory-style accommodation as young as the age of 2, as the member for Congleton has laid out in the debate. We also know that over the last decade there's been video evidence of the destruction of Buddhist temples, and we also had the member for Strangford highlighting the repression which nuns and monks experience on a day-to-day basis. He emphasised the underrepresentation in leadership positions within the People's Republic of China, the restriction in increasing levels of state-sponsored surveillance, cultural events which have been stopped by the Chinese government, and as the member for Congleton emphasised, the 176th worst for journalism and freedom of speech. Of course, as a parenthesis, I wonder if the House would mind my just quickly mentioning the other obvious freedom of speech issue, which is, of course, Jimmy Lai, who is in prison at the moment, used to be, of course, the Apple Daily owner and publicist, and I'm sure the Minister will comment on that, because I'm aware that the Foreign Secretary has met with Sebastian Lai, his son, just this week, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind doing a mini detour in her wind-up speech to update the House on that particular meeting. But, of course.
Thank the Honourable Lady for bringing up that. I put an early day motion just down yesterday on the imprisonment of Jimmy Lai. I would urge all members to note it. Number one, it's a CDM 213, and they might wish to sign it and use that to underline and raise awareness for Jimmy and what he is suppressed. I mean, he's been in jail for some time now, and any thoughts of getting out are very remote.
I thank the member for his contribution, and we know that he is relentless in his highlighting of social injustice, and particularly in this particular case, the lack of freedom of speech of Jimmy Lai and others, because we know that in Tibet there are similar things going on, but as the three main speakers in the debate mentioned, the problem is that due to the difficulty in monitoring what is actually happening in Tibet, we don't hear as much as we should from journalists there. The member for Bristol East made an extremely important point about the climate vulnerable nature of Tibet. Hot-footing back from COP28, she's given us her update on the environmental concerns of such a fragile part of our beautiful planet, and being the third pole ice storage and permafrost thawing with dreadful consequences on the river system, knowing what a lack of water can do in terms of long-term problems and long-term social problems, she's made a very, very important point. She also highlights the potential for Indo-Chinese relations to sour, and makes the important point that when we are speaking to leaders from the People's Republic of China, we must keep that balance between the trade relationship, which is very important to the UK's economy, but crucially, that we do not leave our values at the door. And I wonder whether the Minister could say, when she last raised the question of freedom of religion or belief in Tibet, with her counterpart in the People's Republic of China, and in specific relation to the current Foreign Secretary, who of course is in the other place, what impact she thinks his previous business interests have and his clear speeches that he was giving in Sri Lanka and other places where China has an interest, what she thinks this might do to perhaps cloud the judgment of ministers as they speak one-to-one with counterparts in the People's Republic of China or with those who are represented by the PRC here in London. Could she also outline what representations are being made to China about some of those earlier subjects, the Xinjiang, Hong Kong and Tibet, when trade talks are undergoing? We shouldn't have one box for trade and one box for human rights. It should be part of the same dialogue. What reassurances can the Minister lay out concerning these issues raised today on the floor of the House? In conclusion, we've heard valuable contributions from members of the APPG for freedom of religion or belief, who speak out regularly about the lack of freedom for so many to practice their faith abroad. We heard specifically from the member for Bristol East about the cultural and environmental concerns about the Tibetan platform, but there are specifics about the way that we do our diplomacy, and what reassurances can the Minister give me and the House relating to this important subject of freedom of religion or belief in the People's Republic of China, specifically as regards Tibetan Buddhists. Thank you, Madam.
Minister.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, and I apologise for the delay. Perhaps there will always be a challenge when digital and analogue aspects of parliamentary information don't align, and something we will work on, but my apologies for being late. To the Honourable Lady's point, the Honourable Member for Strangford has kindly provided me, as he always does, with a copy of his speech. Yes, of course, of course.
The summary agenda actually sets out the debate time as starting at 3, and in the House we go by the summary agenda.
Absolutely, which is why I apologise, and my private office will be able to learn from the practicalities of that point. Yes, of
Kerry
course.
McCarthy.
I want to say, Mr. Chair, there was a bit of confusion because when on the website, when it says what's on in Parliament, it did say 4 o'clock. And people did contact me saying there was a 4 o'clock debate. So, and I just thought that it would be 3 o'clock and double-checked because it usually is 3. So I think it's just something that needs to be sort of clarified in future.
It has been noted by the very assiduous PPS who pointed this out to us, and we will take it back.
Right, okay.
Minister. Thank you. Madam Chair, just to say that the Honourable Member Strangford, who always provides me with a copy of his speech, which is hugely helpful, means that I know that I didn't miss a single one of his words, even though I missed those first few minutes. So thank you, as ever, to the Honourable Member for always sharing his speech, something that I think other colleagues should consider doing sometimes. It's a very helpful way to be able to really absorb and think more thoroughly about the issues that are being raised by the
And your
member.
PPS's notes.
Of course. So really, as ever, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this incredibly important debate, for his work, continuing work as Chair of the All-Party Group on International Freedom of Religion and Belief, and indeed for his heartfelt presentation of the tragic Tibetan situation that we see. Also, thank you to Honourable Members for their thoughtful contributions. The Government places huge importance on protecting human rights around the world and on using all our diplomatic tools alongside other countries to highlight abuses where we see them. We are paying close attention to the deeply concerning situation in Tibet, where members of the Buddhist faith are enduring systematic violations of their rights. So I'm glad of the opportunity to be able to reflect on this troubling situation, and I'll do my best to respond to all the points raised on the subject today. We believe that long-term stability in Tibet is best achieved through respect for universal human rights and genuine autonomy for Tibet within the Chinese system. However, China is systematically violating Tibetans' rights, including restricting their freedom of religion of belief, and as colleagues have set out so starkly, under their right to assemble, associate freely, and of course also those troubling reports of forced labour. Tibetans are banned from worshipping the Dalai Lama, and of course those reports of them being arrested for owning even photographs of him, celebrating his birthday, or watching videos of his teaching. The candidate identified by the Dalai Lama as the next Panchen Lama back in 1995 who is a senior figure in Tibetan Buddhism, was forcibly disappeared by the Chinese authorities. Today, the authorities restrict the size of Buddhist monasteries in Tibet, and there are, of course, multiple reports of their destruction, as the Honourable Member for Congleton set out. It is Chinese law that all senior religious appointments must be approved by the authorities. The UK views the Dalai Lama as a respected spiritual leader, and as such, he of course has visited the UK on a number of occasions, and we will continue to do all that we can to encourage freedoms for religious and cultural expression in Tibet and across China. We view the appointment of the next Dalai Lama as a matter for the relevant religious authorities to decide in line with those freedom of religions and belief. And we continue to engage regularly with international partners and NGOs to discuss the situation in Tibet and to continue to raise awareness. But of course, meanwhile, reports continue to document the suppression of Tibetan cultural, linguistic and religious identity. Earlier this year, the UN Special Rapporteurs found that around 1 million Tibetan children have been separated from their families and placed into government-run boarding schools with no access to traditional Tibetan learning. Rural schools have been closed and students forced to attend schools far from their family homes. The Chinese authorities use enforced disappearances to silence critics and suppress dissent in Tibet. We are aware of reports of politically motivated detentions and arrests of Tibetans, as well as mistreatment in detention. UN Special Procedure mandate holders have written to the Chinese authorities regarding the disappearances of Tibetans. There are estimated to be over 700 political prisoners held in Tibetan areas, and monks in particular are targeted for persecution. Reports continue to document the mass collection of DNA and other biometric data in Tibetan regions. On forced labour, Madam Chair, the government is aware of UN reporting from April this year of allegations of that so-called labour transfer and vocational training programmes in Tibet, which are being used as a pretext to undermine Tibetan religious, linguistic and cultural identity and to monitor and politically indoctrinate Tibetans. Yes, of course.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you for your response. It's been brought to my attention that China is pushing to erase the name Tibet. Could I seek the assurance from the Minister and from our government that the word Tibet will continue to be used? The Chinese want to replace it with the Mandarin term Xinjiang, and it must be very clear that Tibet is what it is, the same as the UK is UK. It can't be changed to anything else. The government must also take note that when it comes to meeting the Chinese at the next universal review, that Tibet is a terminology that we continue to use. If you don't mind, please. Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman as ever, and I will take that away. Absolutely, we continue to use the name Tibet as we describe that region of the world. But I will take note of the fact that if that is a developing narrative, it's something we need to pay close attention to and be able to counter. Of course.
Shannon.
I think it's really important to have on the record, and I know whenever the Minister has been quite responsive, and we really appreciate that. Chinese leaders from the Tibet Autonomous Region are visiting the likes of Nepal, of Bhutan, of Thailand. They're seeking to claim the authority of the Dalai Lama as reincarnation. Very clearly, from a Buddhist point of view, Madam Chair and Minister, Right Honourable Lady, government must stand with His Holiness and affirm his total authority over his reincarnation. And it's not something that the Chinese government can give as if they were the Santa Claus of Christmas. The Buddhists have control of the Dalai Lama. Chinese do not.
I agree wholeheartedly with the honourable gentleman, and I think he is generous in his description of that potential further abuse to the freedom of religion for Buddhists. Madam Chair, the Special Rapporteurs warned that these programmes that we could see would be leading to situations of forced labour, and they have suggested that hundreds of thousands of Tibetans have been transferred from work in the rural sector to these new jobs through this process. These constitute systematic human rights violations against Tibetan Buddhists as part of the Chinese authority efforts to erase the Tibetan identity and to assimilate Tibetans into the majority Han culture. My honourable friend, the member for Congleton, set out in stark clarity the shocking real-life impacts on Tibetans as the authorities try to erase their identity. This government, Madam Chair, is determined to promote and protect human rights no matter where those violations and abuses are occurring. We have shown time and again that when allegations are substantiated, we will speak out and hold China to account. We coordinate with partners to draw international attention to the human rights situation in Tibet. Most recently, as the Honourable Member pointed out, on the 8th of November, the G7 Foreign Minister's statement, and in September as part of our Item 4 statement at the UN Human Rights Council. In June last year, the UK and 46 other countries joined a statement at the UN Human Rights Council expressing deep concern about the human rights situation in Tibet and calling on the Chinese authorities to abide by their human rights obligations. The member of Completon, I think, expresses a frustration that many feel that in any multilateral statement, it's invariably less punchy than perhaps any single country statement would be. Yes, of course.
I accept there is frustration about the type of wording used, but there is also frustration about the proportion, the number of words used, or rather the lack of words used with regard to Tibet.
The Honourable Lady sets out her point extremely clearly, and indeed it is something that, as someone who sat in many a multilateral session, thinking of the Honourable Lady's visit just in COP, having led on that 2 years ago, it is a slow and tortuous process often to reach a form of words that as many countries and voices can sign up to as possible. But her point is well made, and we will continue to raise this, and we are seeing these last couple of years have been the first time this issue has been in these statements. We will continue to work on, expanding them and persuading, but by force of the evidence, other countries also to accept the realities of what we see, and therefore to be willing to be stronger in the whole multilateral statements that we're able to put out together. But her point is well made and well heard. Yes, of course.
Here today partly with the focus on the religion of people in Tibet and the fact that they're Buddhist, which is very much a peaceful religion. I wonder whether that plays against them, because if there was a full-scale conflict in Tibet with fighting back, then perhaps it would get more international attention. But sadly, I'm sure the Minister's aware, there have been 158, at least, self-immolations in Tibet, and another 10 by people in exile. And that is their, just the sheer lengths that they will have to go to try to get international eyes upon their plight.
Minister.
The Honourable Lady, I think, highlights a really important, one of the beauties of this extraordinarily peaceful religion, doesn't cause some of the violence and aggressions that one sees where other clashes between religions or beliefs are seen across the world. Madam Chair, I think the challenge of access to Tibet for foreign nationals, of course, including accredited diplomats and journalists, remains highly restricted. British diplomats visited Tibetan areas of Sichuan province in June of this year, and we will continue to push for access to Tibet, including for those UN special rapporteurs, which China either has not responded to or indeed has refused. We are consistent in our calls that there needs to be greater access to Tibet for international observers. And if I may turn to UK policy towards China more broadly, China, of course, has a significant role to play in almost every global issue, and we want to have a strong and constructive relationship. So as such, we continue to engage directly with China to create space for those open, constructive, predictable, stable relations that are important. For instance, in areas of global challenge like climate, global health, those are areas that we need to and want to work together on for the good of the whole of mankind. But we will always condemn human rights violations, both privately in our meetings with Chinese representatives and indeed in public fora, as we've been setting out. The UK government will continue to play a leading role in both pressing China to improve its human rights, get that record to a better place. Yes, of course.
Thank you for giving way. Would she agree, though, that with the question mark over the current Foreign Secretary's business deals, it's quite correct for the House to be asking questions about whether the business deals come first or the human rights comes first?
Minister.
Madam Chair, the China policy has not changed as the personnel in government have. The policy remains entirely unchanged, and the world has sadly changed in the way China is behaving, particularly through its economic coercive activities across a very large area, but also some of these increasing human rights violations. And I think that, I hope, is very clearly set out. The new Foreign Secretary is in absolutely the same place and 100% support, of course, supportive.
The reason I ask the question is because in recent years, particularly since 2018, when Xi Jinping achieved his core leader status, which is when the internal repression and the external aggression did increase, the Foreign Secretary did do positive speeches regarding the Belt and Road Initiative in Sri Lanka, and that's the specific business reference that I was making. She may wish to write to me rather than put it on the record, but I think it is important in an open and democratic system that we get these things out in the open.
So I, Madam Chair, wouldn't wish to speak on behalf of Foreign Secretary when he was a private citizen and his activities there. I think we all, at some level, are supportive and wish to see the direct success of some of the Belt and Road initiative. Those investments were in part, without doubt, an attempt by China to help take the, excuse me, the discovery that they had in their way of investing long-term in their own infrastructure to see their poverty levels drop dramatically to support across the world. But I think there are other aspects to it, and indeed some frustrations where the impact hasn't been as well funded or followed through, that have left investees disappointed. But I think the challenge remains that there has been, and she highlights it herself, a shift in the way the CCP does its business, and it now requires us to lead, continue to lead, and sadly more effort, international efforts, to really hold China to account for what is, without doubt, appalling human rights violations in a number of places, including, of course, in Xinjiang, which a number of members have referenced. On that, we were the first country to lead a joint statement on this at the UN, and our leadership has sustained pressure on China to change its behaviour and to bring other countries' voices with us. In October of this year, the UK led another joint statement on Xinjiang at the UN, calling China out for its human rights violations, and we had there a record number of signatories. I think, to my point earlier around the challenge of continuing to build the evidence base and give other countries the chance to understand and see for themselves some of these violations. That's a piece of work that we will continue to lead, bringing that UK diplomatic leadership across the world. And of course, an interesting point raised by the, excuse me, the Honourable Member for Bristol East. Ministers across government do raise human rights concerns whenever they have discussions with the CCP or other Chinese issues. And it was very interesting to hear, I wasn't aware of that piece of work, policy work that was done in 2013 around that joint piece. I will go and dig it out of the system and see if whether the framework that we use now, or indeed what was suggested then, we can make sure that we maximise the impact that we do. But it is very much on everyone's agenda whenever those relationships exist. But we're very comfortable with that when we talk about engaging with China, there are important economic relationships that we wish to continue to work on, to grow. We have businesses who are keen to invest in what is, of course, an enormous market across the world. But if I may, to conclude, Madam Chair, everyone, everywhere, deserves to enjoy those fundamental human rights, including freedom of religion or belief. And China should respect these rights in Tibet in line with its own constitution and indeed the international frameworks to which it is a party. So until it does so, the UK will continue to hold it to account in public, in private, and in concert with our international partners. We will continue to stand up for our values and to promote and protect human rights in Tibet and around the world. Members' concerns on the forcefulness of messaging and criticism of suppression from Chinese authorities are well heard today. We shall continue to press for stronger language and continued use of sanctions tools to express the disgust and the righteous anger that colleagues have set out so eloquently today.
Thank you, Minister. Jim Shannon's lined up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can I thank all of the right honourable number of members for their contributions, starting with, if I can, with the Honourable Lady for Bristol East. She reminded us of events from her personal knowledge from APPG for Tibet that she chairs and is involved with. We all know that of their culinary expertise in yogurts is one of the things that they like, and a yogurt event where the Chinese step in, try to close it down, try to take away that cultural identity, and also referred to the picture of Buddha. Again, a vicious suppression by the Chinese Communist Party. Schools closed, language restricted, removal of some 2 million people from the countryside to the towns. She also spoke very rightly about the environmental issues. It's something that perhaps I wouldn't have been just so much so, and I thank the Honourable Lady for doing that. But the Tibetan plateau, which I would have some knowledge of, probably from the environmental programmes on TV and so on. But the importance of it isn't just for Tibet. It's for China, it's for India, and we do hope it doesn't become a political football for the future, which unfortunately it might. The Honourable Member for Somerset in an intervention also referred to the importance of highlighting the issue, not just for those of a Christian faith, but those of a Buddhist faith, which is why we've got this debate today. And I think through the APPG we try to do that, speaking up for all faiths and those of no faith. And the Honourable Lady for Congleton does that regularly. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for Congleton as well? I'm very pleased that she is the envoy for our government. I'm also very pleased that she's my friend and does speak up on all the things that are important in this House. She underlined the issues of the Friends of the Conservative group that was there, who outlined the problems as far back as 2013 for Tibet, I understand, and the timetable of 2016 and 2020. Human rights deterioration in Tibet, the indoctrination of children as young as 2 years of age. My goodness me. My youngest grandchild is just over 1, and he's a wee dynamo at 1 year old. But you imagine taking him away to an indoctrination where he loses all knowledge of his parents. She also reminded us of that words do matter, and I think she's right. Sometimes we think they're not enough, and they're not enough sometimes, but it's important that we do. And she referred to cultural genocide, education and linguistic genocide as well, and I think it is, she's right. The Honourable Lady for Hornsey and Wood Green, the Shadow Minister, again reminded us of the removal of people, the destruction of temples, the linguistic restrictions, oppression came up in that each and every time, and underlined as well when we come to making deals, trade deals with any country, and China in particular, that we ingratiate into the centre of that the human rights importance that there is for people across the world, and trade talks that there must never be a deal that doesn't take on board all the issues. The Minister very kindly, she always does, takes our viewpoints on board, and I know that when she has the opportunity to read the Hansard and have the discussions with her PPS, that all of those other things will come under. Absolutely, the Minister understands the issue. She refers to the tragic Tibetan situation, refers to freedom of religious belief, disappearance of Tibetans by the Communist Chinese Communist Party, the documentation of oppression, children removed from their families, political motivations, forced labour, again moved from the countryside to the towns. She also referred to the issue of journalists who have been restricted in what they're able to report. I think the one thing that comes out of the Minister's statement is very clearly, I believe, and I think hopefully others will agree, that our Minister and our government are not behind the wall and telling Tibet that these things are telling China that these things are wrong in Tibet. Perhaps what we wish to see is a bit more zealousness when it comes to highlighting these issues at every occasion. I must thank some of the people who are in the gallery today, Madam Chair, who have taken the time to come along. Today, we're the voice for these people. We're their voice for all those suppressed, oppressed religious minorities, and Buddhists in particular, in Tibet. And we want them all to know that when it comes to standing up for them and standing alongside them, this House and its members will not be found wanting. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the matter of the persecution of Buddhists in Tibet. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.